We are going to be looking at what is called the CN object, and I'm going to talk through these screens using some of the source code files from the textbook. So as I go through and talk about things, if you want to come back and have the a text version of it, you can always go back to your PowerPoints and use them. We are going to look at the folder that has our source code files in it, and we downloaded the files from Blackboard, and then you need to extract them. So you would need to right click and extract all on those files, unless you're on a Mac, and then you can just double click and it'll extract automatically. And then we go into this, and all of the example code that's in the textbook is here. So we're working with chapter 3, and I like to use this preview pane over here on the right hand side sometimes, just to kind of glance through, because sometimes you'll remember that, oh, there was an example in chapter 3 or 4. I don't remember what it was, but if you use this preview pane, you can quickly kind of go through and take a look or glance at and look for an example of what you need. To turn that preview pane on, it's under View, and just toggle on and then toggle off, etc. Okay, so as I talk through a lot of these examples, I'm going to be using this preview pane. If I want to actually take a look at the code, I right click and I go in. Instead of loading it with Visual Studio, I edit it with Notepad++. And then a lot of times what I'll do is Control A, select all, Control C, copy, and we're going to move it over to our JDoodle environment and investigate this screen a little bit more. In the JDoodle environment, remember you want to log in if you want to save your work, so make sure that you're logged in if you want to save it. I'm going to paste, Control V, the code that we borrowed, or the source code that we took from the textbook. And then we want to work with, or we are starting to learn in this section, the CIN operator. And so CIN, what you see here is CIN, is the standard input object for C++. And what that means is that's the standard way that we're going to get input from the, what we call from the console or from the stream. Okay, and just as a note, that stream operator, notice it has like greater than, greater than. The greater than symbol is what they call the stream extraction operator, because we are extracting data from the console stream. And then the less than is the stream insertion operator. So I like to try to use the correct terminology. Sometimes I mix them up, so I'm just going to make myself a note up there. And so the stream extraction operator, the CIN statement, is what we're looking at. And when you use that, you have to use the #include preprocessor directive. And you also are going to often use it with what's called a prompt. So a prompt is the statement that comes right before the CIN statement. So the cout will prompt the user for what to input. In this example, it's what is the length of the rectangle, and then we input it with the CIN length. Okay, and then usually that data then gets stored to that variable. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we run this example here in just a moment. When you are working in JDoodle, you are going to have to turn this interactive mode on in order to use the CIN operator. Otherwise, things will not work correctly. And so I'll show you what error message you might get here in just a minute when we're working with that. When you are working, it is and you use the CIN operator, and the input comes from the keyboard into what they call, or to the input buffer, where it's stored as characters, and then the CIN operator will convert it to a data type that matches the variable. So it's going to come in as a character, and then it'll automatically get converted to, in this case, as an integer. And if you notice with this integer declaration, we haven't used this much, but you can declare more than one variable, excuse me, of the same data type on a line if you use commas. So I'm declaring 3 variables here. They're all integer variables. So if I execute this code, it should give me a prompt. What is the length of the rectangle? So let's say 2. What is the width of the rectangle? I'll say 6. And I should mentally calculate, oh, my area should be 12. Press enter, and it outputs the area is 12. Okay. Now, whenever you're working with some new code or practicing with this, get curious and try to figure out, well, what happens if I input 2.3? Well, whoa, something weird just happened here. Okay, it says, what is the length of the rectangle? And I tried to do 2.3, and then it went like crazy. And so why did it do that? And then it told me the area was 0. Okay, so it went kind of crazy because it's trying to input 2 integer variables. So I inputted 2, and it took that as a character. Excuse me, I inputted 2.3. It took that as a character 2. It converted the character 2 into the number 2. And then it tried to pick up the next character, which is this decimal point. Well, it didn't know what to do with the decimal point, and so it converted it to 0, and so it ended up taking 2 times 0, which is why it gave me the area of the rectangle is 0. So whenever you're working with something new in programming, no matter what the language, start doing some, try to break it, because that's going to show you how the code might work behind the scenes, so to speak. If we run this again and we execute it and input maybe some proper data, 5 and 4, and the output is 20, then we're looking good. Okay, to get around that error, we could just go up here and change the data type from integer to double. And when we change from integer to double and we execute and try to input then a 2.3 and maybe a 4.5, and it calculates 10.35, which is in the ballpark if I do that kind of mentally, that would prevent the mistake or the error that we just had. It's also possible, maybe if you're working with data, that you do want the inputs to be integers, but maybe the area will be a double, so you could switch up those data types as needed in your code. Okay? And so there are some weird things that can kind of go along when you're working with this, so just be aware of that. Okay? And last but not least, well, actually, let's take a look at when you're working with JDoodle, you don't need to do the system pause in here. And that should be it for that example. One more example from chapter 3. This is, and I'll try to put the example numbers up here at the top so you know where to reference that in terms of the source code. This is the same program, except right here they use a different way to input 2 items from the keyboard. You can write code like this, so you can enter more than 1 item. So if we take a look at how this executes, it should execute the same as the last time, except the directions say separate your data by a space. So I could do 2 space 4, hit enter, and it's going to give me the area of a rectangle. If I don't enter a space when I'm entering it, again, 2, 4, it doesn't recognize it as separate data. If I hit enter here, it's going to sit there and just wait until I input some other number, and then it's going to execute. Now again, I was entering integers there, so that that error message that we got before did not show up. To wrap up the CN operator introduction, if you do use multiple inputs, you have to separate them with spaces, as we just saw, and then be sure that or also know that they don't have to be the same data type. They can be different data types, but the order makes a difference. Whatever you type first will go into the first variable, whatever you type second will go into the second variable, etc.